Okay, in this video I just want to do something slightly different than I've been doing, and of course the 007 series is one of the longest, most popular uh, series in cinema history. I just want to give you my own take on the character actors of James Bond, the way I see it, and I'll go from kind of my least favourite. It's not to say they weren't good at the role, just maybe I couldn't relate to them, or maybe the scripts weren't as good as the other ones, or whatever it was. But I'm going to start with Pierce Brosnan. Um, I just saw his portrayal of James Bond. Yeah, albeit the scripts were sort of not all that good, and you could probably sum up his James Bond career with three letters: CGI. Quite sadly, but otherwise, he's dashing, he's handsome, he gets the job done. But I think Tomorrow Never Dies might have been his best one. And, the one where is it Sean Bean was the other double O agent. These were pretty decent, but the other ones were just bizarre. Just for the reason that, I don't know, the script quality, and I just didn't see like his true character shine through in the role. It was pretty plastic, and for that reason, he's at my number six. Even though George Lazenby only played the role once, I personally quite enjoyed the movie. And, when his wife died and stuff, it is really a moving time in the Bond history of it. And I think he could have made a very good career, at least another two or three movies from it. It would have been interesting to see the character development. But I think the quality of the movie was pretty good. It's I think there's some depth in the character, which is lacking in the entire Pierce Brosnan series, sadly, And I know he's most people's least favourite, because he's only played the role once, but I just seen quite a bit of potential there. And I think that his agent advised that the Double O series wouldn't last much longer than the next movie, and he rejected to do any more scripts. And, it's probably one of the worst pieces of advice that any film actor's ever been given. But George Lazenby is obviously known for that very emotional part where he gets married and then the wife gets shot. And you could say, as Billy Idol said, it's a nice day for a white wedding. Next on my list is many people's favourite Bond. He's very gritty, realistic, strong. He's known for his action performances, and he's known to complain a little bit because of the physically taxing roles. And but I think he was probably the best paid James Bonds, and that, of course, is Daniel Craig. And I think that every movie that he did offers something different. I've not even seen the last movie, but yeah, I mean, he's the only blonde Bond, and he's pretty intelligent. Comes across. Some people say that he plays it like Zoolander or something, but I don't quite agree with that. There was decent character depth, and it was many occasions quite dark. And I suppose the modern films and the modern audiences are going down these type of films, the past 10, 20 years. But I think he did shine in the role. He's definitely, his portrayal of James Bond is very, very good, realistic, smart, intelligent. Middle of the road, I would say. And definitely enjoyed all the films. And I think one of them, possibly Casino Royale, was the highest grossing film. And he did, I would say, is the only James Bond that was able to outshine some of the Bond girls. If you think about that, it's kind of true. All the poses he did and kind of the followings he had in that sense. So, yeah, he's number 3 on my list, Daniel Craig. Now, Timothy Dalton is not everybody's favourite James Bond, but I particularly liked his portrayal of the character because he's very simple to the point. And I also think that the films that he appeared in, the soundtracks were excellent, and they were well written films, and the supporting actors were all good. Um, the baddies were pretty good as well. It was good for the time, sort of the mid to late 80s. So I would say just his simple portrayal of James Bond, um, kind of a simple sense of humour, not too outlandish, like Roger Moore and Sean Connery, but I would say, and he's obviously quite charismatic as well. But I would say the whole production of the movies that he was in was some of the best quality James Bonds, and for that reason, I'll just put him slightly ahead of Daniel Craig. Some of Daniel Craig's movies are quite long and sort of patchy, I would say, but Timothy Dalton is right down the line. Very action packed and very enjoyable movies that he was in. So for that reason, I put him at my third best James Bond. Now going back to the source, Sean Connery portrayed not only a realistic James Bond, but in sometimes quite bizarre, sometimes quite otherworldly. But he's mostly known for beating up the bad guy, rescuing the woman, having some intimate relations, like how we say, with her, and then lighting up a cigarette. And this, of course, is really the groundwork of the James Bond right through the entire series. He's like the father of the James Bonds. And I would say that none of them really come up, to his portrayal of it. Each of them, Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan, they had something of that original James Bond that they didn't have at all. You would have to say the smoothest and sleekest of the James Bonds as well. And, obviously Sean Connery's the most rounded James Bond character, which at the time maybe is a little bit politically correct. But nowadays, of course, Sean, I think he'd be jailed for portraying James Bond like that in 2020. But yeah, he's many people's favourite, and obviously the father of the character itself. But there is one more, and obviously we know who that is. Now, it's known that this James Bond had the only military experience, I think, out of the six. He admittedly portrayed the character as quite unrealistic. He was aware that he was making movies, and he made an effort. We all know he made an effort to make light of the serious situations, and but during his time as James Bond, we had some of the most outlandish Bond villains, characters and all that. We had Odd Job with Sean Connery, but we had Jaws most memorably with Roger Moore, and I think definitely the Bond villains and the Bond girls were the best during the entire James Bond series. So I'm not just putting Roger Moore as the best James Bond. I think possibly, that's Sean Connery, but I think that the whole supporting actors and, as I mentioned, the Bond girls and the Bond villains, the scripts were quite bizarre, Moonraker, but very memorable movies, great soundtracks. And if you wanted a really good night out, you'd definitely want to go and see a Roger Moore James Bond movie. Some of the most memorable lines, and when he's kind of finished dealing with the bad guy, some of the most comical. Got some of the best laughs. And when you're in the cinema watching it live, and had a real atmosphere when you're watching a Roger Moore James Bond movie. So he's just head and shoulders above the rest. Nobody does it better. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, Roger Moore. That's the time I grew up as a child. But when you sort of compare them all, even portrayed the role, I think, well into his 60s, I think it was, and he was having some kind of Bond girl who was almost a teenager. Very bizarre, but he was an assassin. He was a bodyguard. He was, a detective. He was sometimes like a superhero And a lot of the scripts took some of the movies at the time, like Superman, and they compare that to jumping out of a plane, and Jaws and things like that. And what else? Usually the highest grossing movie of that year, that Bond movie had something about it. So when the Bond movies came out, is definitely you had to go and see that James Bond during the 1980s. In my personal favourite time, the 1970s. And I just thought it brought to mind Live and Let Die. Obviously mentioned Moonraker, but I think some of the biggest plots of the Illuminati, which they were actually up to, and they're still planning on the destruction, I would say, of California by an earthquake, which is what Live and Let Die is all about. I made a video on that before. So I think some of the plots and writing in these Roger Moore movies are extremely relevant, for the days we're living in. It gives an actual clue about what these elite people are doing using the vehicle of James Bond.